What's good, YouTube? This is Boxingwave, and we are back with the Wave Report. We're just going to cover last night's fights and give you my final thoughts. Shout out to everyone that was here yesterday during the live that I did, live coverage of the fight. Shout out to everyone that are new to the channel, all the new subscribers, all the people that donated, just all the supporters, people that liked or commented on the video. I appreciate the support. Okay, I know it was a lot of people. It's crowded last night. You know, everybody was doing their lives. All the heavy, the big channels were on live. Shout out to everyone that was here. So I wanted to, I was able to sleep on it and think about how, my approach on the review of the Shakur, Stevenson, and Edwin De Los Santos fight. And we'll get to that. I'll get to that last. I just want to go through some of the preliminary fights on this card before I get to the main event. And, I think this was just another card where it's just fueled with a bunch of future superstars. You know what I mean? You have Emiliano Vargas, who had his tune-up. He did good, got a stoppage in the second round. Abdullah Mason, same with him. I mean, those two are on a collision course. They're the same age. They got roughly around the same fights. And they're gonna be fighting for a title or unifying at some point. Not now, but at 135, I see them being two of the potential future stars in the sport. They both did their game. Again, both of them scored second round knockouts. I'm not completely sure of who I think is better between the two. I think they're still a little rough around the edges. But I enjoy seeing them, and they're only 19 years old. Again, I wouldn't want them to face each other yet. Maybe a couple more years, but there are better prospects to me out there, but these two are very good. I still think that Shushu is probably one of the more promising guys. I just think he's just a little bit more polished than these two. But these two are good too. You know what I mean? And I know Shushu fights at a lower weight for now, but just talking about prospects in general, I think Shushu is one of my favorite. You know what I mean? I think he's up there. He's one of the top guys up there, in my opinion. And he's gonna be fighting on another card. I mean, Top Rank is loading these cards with a bunch of prospects, which I like. Xana Zayas is going to be on the next card. Who else? Shushu's going to be on the next card. And that's the way they normally do it. All right. But they both did good, and I can't wait to see them on the next one. All right, so let's talk about Troy Isley. Troy Isley, middleweight fight between him and Vladimir Hernandez. This was an 8-rounder. And it was a big test for a big jump in opposition for Troy Isley, because Vladimir Hernandez has wins over Julian J. Rock Williams and Lorenzo Truck Simpson. You know what I mean? And that's a big deal. I mean, these are recent wins too. You know what I mean? Yes, he got stopped by Jesus Ramos, but for Troy to take this kind of fight this early in his career, so he has 10 pro fights. And he's fighting against a guy that's just beaten another top prospect and a former unified champion. It's a tough task. And I personally scored it 4-4. I thought it was a draw. I think there was maybe one round in there that was a little debatable. I think it might have been the 5th round or something like that. But I think I scored it a draw. I thought it was 4 rounds. Troy won the first 4 rounds. And let me tell you, that 4th round from Troy was a huge round for him, because he was able to hurt Vladimir a couple of times. He was able to cut him. And it seemed at that point that he was going to move forward and possibly stop him within the next round or two. But, man, I feel like Troy punched himself out. And Vladimir won the remaining rounds, in my opinion. You know what I mean? And they gave Troy the win, 7-5. I think it was unanimous. I wouldn't call it a robbery or anything, because it was a close fight. But I think the draw would have been best. You know what I mean? Troy, in my opinion, you know, I have to go back and watch the Lorenzo Simpson fight, but I think Troy did better than Lorenzo from what I remember. And that fight was close too, you know, but I think Troy, in those 4 rounds that he did well to me, he did better than Lorenzo did throughout the fight. You know what I mean? He was just more aggressive. He was landing harder shots, more effective shots. He was more of a dog. But I think he really punched himself out in the 4th round. And that caused him to lose those other rounds, in my opinion. You know what I mean? Vladimir just finished stronger. Troy held his own still, but Vladimir was doing better in the second half. Just the volume just never stopped. It was too much. And yes, no, he wasn't landing the big shots, and he wasn't really hurting Troy. But being that Troy was gassed, it was less volume for him. More, he was leaning on the ropes a lot longer. You know, I think Troy was doing good, like really, really good, while he was keeping the fight in the center of the ring. You know what I mean? He was outboxing him and, you know, just being more accurate, hitting him with the harder shots. But Vladimir just outworked him in the second half. And it's not a bad showing for Troy. It's just you went in there with a really, actually, even if you feel the fight should have been a draw or you gave an extra round to Hernandez, it's still a good performance from Troy, being that he fought a guy only 10 fights in that tough. You know, Vladimir is, at this point, if you just ignore the the record. I know the record says 14-5. If you ignore that record, you will see that it's quality fights on his resume. You know what I mean? And his most recent wins are big wins. You know what I mean? He's going to be tough for anyone at 160. You know, he's probably a top 10 fighter. And for Troy to pull out a win, even though I thought it was a draw, it just shows what level he's at. You know what I mean? And I think when I was live, I think most of the conversation was about whether or not Troy was on a level of Lorenzo Simpson or Austin Williams, you know, Ammo Williams. And that's what we were talking about last night. You know what I mean? But Troy, I think, passed the test of being at that level this early. And I look forward to seeing him. You know, I think there's certain part of his games, again, he needs to polish. But overall, I think he did good, you know. All right. Let's talk about Floyd Diaz. All right, Floyd Diaz had a tough fight too. This is another fight against Max Ornelas, who I wasn't familiar with until now. Very, very close fight. I think Max won more rounds, but I think Floyd, obviously, he had the 2 knockdowns, a knockdown in the second round and the third round. But Max was more consistent throughout the fight. You know, Floyd lunging in a lot. Yes, he's fast, he's explosive, you know what I mean? He's quick feet and whatever. He's able to dash in and close distance very quickly. But at times, he walked into a lot of counters, you know. And this guy, Max Ornelas, even though it was a split decision loss, I thought one of the judges had a little too wide for Floyd. He gave Max only 2 rounds. It was 78-72. And that kind of bothered me, you know what I mean? Let me go to the bout real quick and see if they're going to show, if they did show the scorecards and what rounds were scored. All right, I'll check that later. I just want to get my point across. Floyd, again, I think the major issues I had with Floyd was it wasn't much of a jab with him. You know, I know he was much shorter guy, much smaller guy overall. You know, wasn't many setups there, kind of just lunging in and leaping in with power shots continuously. And, you know, it kind of reminds me a little bit of the Filipino fighter at 126. Had the controversy fight with Gary Russell Jr. You guys know what I mean. The kind of reminds me of him a little bit. Mark Masayo. All right, some similarities there. You know, a lot of power, very explosive, very fast. But as far as the setups, you know, not enough feints. You know, just getting low, and then leaping forward with power shots continuously. Just looking for one big shot, you know what I mean? You know, he needs to find other ways to close distance, you know, and especially being that he's a smaller guy in the division. You know, you fight taller, rangier fighters like that, you gotta find other ways to close the distance, you know what I mean? Instead of just basing it solely on your power and athleticism, you know what I mean? So it's not a bad performance. I thought the fight could have gone either way. I wasn't expecting them to give it to Ornelas, being that Floyd is the undefeated prospect here. You know what I mean? I believe Ornelas might have been undefeated too, but I mean, Floyd was a guy with the name, the buzz. And I knew it was close, and I figured, you know, they were going to give it to Floyd. But I think the judge that had it 78-72 is crazy disrespectful. I think Max, at bare minimum, out of this 8-round fight, he at bare minimum won 4 rounds to me. You know what I mean? So, you know, I think that was a little ridiculous with the judges. I think the judges, you know, I think there's a 77-73. Even that, I don't agree with, you know. And then you had one judge that actually did have it for Ornelas, 76-74, which sounded, that was the only card that wasn't disputable to me. I think the other two, especially the 78, the Dave Moretti card was terrible. You know what I mean? You know, but on 118, you know, as a division, you know, there's talent there, but Inoue, the monster, is up. A lot of guys that recently was really good at the division moved up. So, you know, I think the division is up for grabs, you know, even for some of the guys that's in 112 and 115 that's going to be moving up there eventually. You know what I mean? Floyd being at 118, he's clearly not a big guy at 118. But, you know, the division is up for anyone right now. You know what I mean? All right, and this is for a WBC, like a youth world bantam title, all right? So it was like a junior WBC title that was on the line for this fight. All right. Let's go with the other worst fight of the night, and that's Brian Norman Jr. against Quentin Randall. This fight here was a terrible fight. And with all the buzz leading up to this fight, you know, you got two guys undefeated. Quentin Randall, older, started boxing late, has this crazy, crazy wild life story. All right. They've been talking about it all week. You know, he's done interviews about it. Quentin Randall has a crazy story. So I'm not taking anything away from him as a person, you know, or anything like that, you know. But they sold the people. The talks between the two fighters was good. Everything was good about this fight outside of the actual fight. You know what I mean? Brian Norman Jr., again, I picked against him in this fight because of the reasons of what we saw. Brian Norman won the fight just from being aggressive. But as far as clean punching, as far as points, there was nothing there. You know what I mean? There's so many things that I feel like he can work on. Again, he can punch. He is fast. He is explosive, but I just don't see the talent. You know, and out of all of these prospects, I see the least in him that's on this card. You know, I just never was really sold on him. Part of the reason why I picked against him here, I mean, Quentin Randall clearly was even more limited because outside of a 1-2, he really didn't have much. I expected some hooks and some uppercuts from him. I didn't get that. But it was a terrible fight. You know, as far as the scoring, I'm not mad at the scoring because Quentin didn't fight at all. This was a hug fest, whatever way you want to call it. Brian Norman wins because he was actually trying to make a fight, but he smothered his punches. You know, I basically said, you know, he's Sean Porter with the physicality without the boxing. Without the boxing. You know what I mean? You know how people used to say Sean's a football player and all that stuff? Very physical, not much boxing. Well, Brian Norman Jr. was all the physical without the boxing, without the clean punches. You know what I mean? Like, where was the jabs? Where were the counters? You know what I mean? Where was it? I didn't get anything from Brian Norman Jr. You know, but he won the fight fairly because Quentin Randall didn't show up. And that's about it. It was a bad fight. There was no good rounds. They engaged a lot more than Shakur and Edwin did. But it was a hold fest. You know, and Brian, you know, when it comes to Brian, yo, we are not going to live forever off sparring stories, man. We're not. Like, all right, we heard what happened. You've been in there with Crawford and Tank and all that. That's cool. We don't care. Even if it was on film, I wouldn't care. I said this last night. You know, a lot of people like leaking footage now of sparring. I don't care. I don't care. It doesn't matter. You know what I mean? We want to see what you can do in a pro fight. You know, that's like making a call and then making another call when the money is on the line. There's a difference. You know what I mean? The money ain't on the line in a sparring match, especially when you're trying to work on some things. And I know there's some people that like hard sparring and stuff like that. Yes, people get knocked out. Yes, it's still dangerous. You can still get hurt. I understand that. But we're not going to live off sparring stories. You know, I know it's going to keep being brought up in his interviews. But he came out. And that rumor started to come out. And, you know, he said what he said about it in the past. You know, he don't speak too much on it now. But the same with Quentin Randall. For him to go and bring up all of these names of all these different fighters he's been around and he's sparred with, him too. Like, where was the fight in you? You know, you've been through all of that, but where was the fight in you last night? All that talking you did about exposing Brian Norman and all that, where was that? Where was that energy? You're saying the guy didn't fight nobody. You're saying all of this. You wanted to fight how you wanted to fight. Why would you call a guy out to do that? To do that. Just to hold all night. You landed some good jabs and some good right crosses and stuff, but where was the hook? Where was the uppercut? Where was the fight? Barely went to the body. You look very, very limited. You know what I mean? I think there's still a lot of room for improvement for Brian Norman, though. There's some things got to change. I think he still has some potential, but he definitely need to change some things, you know what I mean, in his camp, and maybe get with some other people and develop some things in other areas and areas that he doesn't have, you know what I mean? He's still young. I don't know how old how old is he? I think like 23 probably. He's 22, okay. Yeah, so it's not the end of the world, but Quentin Randall's like 33 years old, bro. That was your moment, and you failed, you know? And it wasn't competitive. It's like, listen, people lose fights every day. That's cool. I don't get on fighters for losing. All right, it's about the effort, and I didn't see the effort from Quentin. I saw the effort from Brian. It's just that what he was doing wasn't effective because he was smothering himself, and Quentin was smothering him too. You know what I mean? By tying up and locking himself in because he didn't want to engage. He didn't want to engage. All right, but you know, it is what it is. Sometimes the styles just don't match up well, you know, clearly, and it is what it is. All right, all right. Let's talk about the fight of the night, Emmanuel Navarrete against Robson Conceicao. Emmanuel Navarrete gave us two really, really good fights this year. You know, the performance was definitely better against Oscar Valdez, but, I mean, this was a better fight, a way more competitive fight, and I think the draw was warranted, you know what I mean? I personally think that Robson won more rounds, but I think, you know, with the knockdowns, there was 2 knockdown score in the fight. I think I'm not mad at the draw because some of the rounds were debatable. You know what I mean? I think when it's like clear rounds, like I thought the Isley Hernandez fight was clear rounds. You know what I mean? Whereas this fight, there was a few rounds, especially in the final rounds, you know, in the second half were a little bit debatable. But, you know, Emmanuel Navarrete had his toughest fight here, at least at an elite level. This was his toughest fight. I wouldn't say Robson neutralized him, but he not completely neutralized him. But what Robson did worked. He fought fire with fire. And at 35 years old, he was able to outwork Emmanuel Navarrete by throwing way more. Emmanuel Navarrete Drew Sutton around 400 something punches, and Robson Conceicao was at 800 something. So you throw double the amount of punches, and it's not like he's just throwing jabs. He's throwing power shots. He's countering. He's landing like some combinations and stuff. Clearly, Navarrete's punchings were more effective when he did land, but you got to give Robson Conceicao a lot of credit. Showed a lot of heart, a lot of grit. He took a lot of damage and fought to the very end. I was a little bit concerned when he was walking back to his corner going into the 12th round. He looked like he was completely out of it. It kind of reminded me of some other fighters that, lost their lives after a fight. The way, the condition he was in, it was a little bit concerning because he looked like he was barely able to walk. Just to go into the 12th round and still put on a show and still outthrow Emmanuel at Navarrete. No, he didn't have a lot of power and pop behind those punches, but it was just a performance. Was a great performance from Robson, and he really showed up. And he did exactly what he was saying before the fight. He was talking about his daughter, how he wanted to be world champion, and how he was making promises and not losing a fight. Well, he didn't win the fight, but he didn't lose. Which is good. I don't really want to see a rematch, simply because even though it was a good fight, there's other fights that I just want to see. I want to see unification. Shaki Forza just got to top rank. So if there is some sort of unification, I would love to see Forza fight Navarrete. But I'm a little bit worried about Robson Conceicao. In my opinion, I don't think that kind of fight, a fight that I expected him to get stopped at some point. And even as I was watching the fight, I expected him to get stopped. After the 3rd, 4th round, I was expecting a stoppage within the next round or two. I thought maybe by the 6th round, 7th round, it was going to be too much. I think that fight is going to take a lot out of him. Last night I said this is going to be similar to, Ugas after the Spence fight. You know what I mean? I think Ugas it took so much damage that the next fight he goes into, and if he fights a puncher with volume, I just think the durability is not going to really be there like that. You know what I mean? And he's going to get stopped, possibly by a fighter that he would be capable of beating. You know what I mean? But he's going to probably stay in the mix because he's a top dude at 130 that's not a champion. He's a top contender at the division. And if Navarrete moves up and he doesn't fight, this guy or Shaki or whoever, I could see Robson being an opponent for Shaki Foster in his first fight there, at top rank. You know what I mean? So Robson can still be used, but I think that fight, I personally think that performance took a lot out of him. As far as Emmanuel Navarrete, he's getting, some slander online. Now, you have the fight with Oscar Valdez. Now, no one can beat this guy. Now, he had this performance against Robson Conceicao. And now everybody feels everyone would beat him. You got to understand. Let me make things clear. If he stays at 130, Shaki Forza is not throwing that many punches. And Shaki Forza is not a big puncher neither, but neither is Robson. Shaki Foster is not throwing 800-plus punches. That's not his style. Robson boxes well, but he's winning a trade. That's one of the things I said in a prediction video. And that's one of the things why I thought Robson would get stopped, because I knew he was going to engage and ends up getting clipped, at some point. Oshaki, Hector Garcia, I don't know where he's at. And I know he's over there with PBC. And, I don't know when we're going to see him again. But Hector and Joe Cordina. Joe Cordina is going to be moving up anyway. Or I'm sorry, not moving up. But Lee Wood is going to be moving up to face him, most likely. Those guys they're not going to throw 800 punches. And I think it takes more than just outboxing or countering Navarrete to perform this well against him. The reason why Robson survived and almost won this fight is because of the volume. Very, very high volume in this fight. Very, very high. And Again, Emmanuel Navarrete is high volume when he's beating you up. But he takes long periods. He's not like William Zepeda, who's throwing 1,000, 1,200 punches in a fight. You know, now William Zepeda will, in my opinion, give Navarrete a trouble. That is the one guy at 135 that could really give him trouble. But all of these other boxers that are really good and slick, that's not really in Shakur, or Shockey Foster, you know what I mean? I'm not saying those guys can't win, but if they do win against Navarrete, it'll be in a different way. You know, and it'll be hard because they will have to be forced to fight and let their hands go more than we're used to seeing them. And again, Emmanuel Navarrete is still a puncher with awkward angles. Very awkward. Very hard to prepare for. Robson survived and took the punishment. Are these other guys able to take that kind of punishment in matching his volume? It's not many guys that's willing to do it. You know what I mean? So, again, you got to look at the matchup. You got to look at the fight. You got to look at the styles. You know, again, like Navarrete dominated Oscar Valdez, right? Dominated him. Had him crying. Had his whole eye puffed up. Couldn't even see out of his eye. Robson Conceicao, who lost to Valdez, did much better. You know, all these fights are going to go differently. You just got to base the fights on how the fighter fights and not solely on the outcome of these fights. It was a tough fight for Navarrete. Robson was able to match his energy and outthrow him. And that's what scored him the draw. You know what I mean? But Navarrete, I am not sleeping on any of these guys that, you know, Navarrete, I'm not sleeping on him just because he had a tough fight. You know, Liam Wilson knocked him down 2 fights ago. And I didn't even know who the hell that guy was until that fight. You know what I mean? So don't sleep. You know, Navarrete did worse against Wilson compared to Valdez, who's rated much higher. You know what I mean? Then we got the final fight, man. It's another performance. It definitely, like, first off, yes, it was one of the worst fights that I've seen recently. It was, because no one engaged. It was one of the worst fights. It's not the first fight that I've seen in Shakur that was like this, though. All right, the Nakatia fight was very similar to this fight. All right. This might even have been a little worse. I haven't seen that fight in a long time, but the Nakatia fight was like this. And this is probably the worst fight that I've seen since Guillermo Rigondeaux against John Rio Casimero. All right, that fight was even worse because Edwin didn't engage either. At least not enough. At least John Rio Casimero in that fight was trying to engage with Rigo. Rigo was just making him miss and not making him pay. This fight here, you had 2 fighters with similar capabilities as far as, like, athleticism. Let me say that. That were overly cautious. And I don't care. People say, oh, Edwin was trying to make the fight. Not really, man. He really didn't engage like that, man. You know what I mean? He could have done more. And a few times that he lunged in, he paid for it. A few times. But a lot of the time, Shakur did nothing. Shakur got out of the way and moved somewhere else. What did I take out of this fight with Shakur Stevenson? To be honest, man, poor performance, but I'm not going to get out of line with this. What I realized is Shakur is a little bit of a bully. You know, he got in there with someone that he respected because he respected their power. He respected their speed. He respected their skills overall. And because of that, Shakur didn't want to engage. Even from a counter-punching standpoint, he just didn't do enough. You know, maybe at the very end, I don't know if it was the last round or maybe the 11th round, where he landed like 2 or 3 1-2s that were clean. Outside of that, though, there really wasn't much there for Shakur. You know, you put Shakur in there with someone that can match him, but not engage with him. He really had nothing to do. He just waited. You know? He just waited and waited and waited and waited. He waited all the way to the point where Edwin got frustrated and would lunge in at times, and he would counter him. But neither one of them engaged enough. You know, and I think like we got 4 or 5 rounds straight with nothing. I didn't even want to score. I didn't want to score this card. I don't want to score rounds based on 1 or 2 more jabs you landed when you're only landing like 3 or 4 jabs a round. You know, I don't even think the punch stats that they were showing on television was completely accurate. I mean, there were long, dry periods of them just staring at each other. You know what I mean? You know what that fight reminds me of? If you watch MMA, Francis Ngannou fought who's the big black guy that was like, yeah, my balls is hot. I can't remember his name. Derek Lewis. Francis Ngannou fought another dangerous puncher who wasn't that far off from his prime, and Derek Lewis. And they stood there and watched each other because they didn't want to engage at all. Neither one of them wanted to initiate because they were too concerned about the power of the other fighter. You know, and Francis was coming off of that loss to Stipe Miocic. And it just reminded me of this a mirror match. These two guys are just standing there waiting for the other guy to do something. You know, and there was a few times Edwin did try to initiate, but he wasn't consistent with it. You know, so I say Shakur is a little bit of a bully because he will initiate a fight when he knows he got you. You know what I mean? Like, he didn't fight like that with Oscar Valdez. He didn't fight like that with Robson Conceicao. But I'm disappointed in Edwin too because it's like I compared him to Jose Benavidez when he fought Danny Garcia. You want to taunt and just make the opponent look bad because you're making them miss, but you're not making them pay. So Jose, even though he's losing a fight with Danny, you make Danny miss. And you're like, look, everybody. This guy is nobody. He's nothing. Yeah, but what are you doing to win? You're not making Danny look bad by making a miss if he's beating you. He's still winning the fight. So this guy, Edwin de los Santos, went in there to show people that he belonged. But he didn't go in there to win. He wanted to prove to people that he belonged at this level. He wanted to prove to people that Shakur wasn't really that good. All you did was you lost a lot of fans because people were excited for this fight. And people that didn't know who you were knew who you were because it was people like me and other content creators and guys like Teddy Atlas, Hall of Famer guys, hyping this fight up. Because they saw your fight with Rayo. They saw your fight with Adorno. Just for you to go in there and just, yo, you go. You two are playing tag. Well, Shakur won the game of tag. He out-tagged them. He didn't out He didn't. I don't even want to call it the sweet science. It was just playing tag. Hit you. Oh, you try to hit me back. Oh, you miss. Hit you again. Oh. It's like no contact. It was no real contact. You know what I mean? And I thought Shakur was past it. You know, again, not everybody is going to wait the way that De Los Santos waited. But let me tell you guys this, all right? And I'm going to end it with this. And I said this last night. There's a narrative that's being pushed right now that no one's going to want to face. Well, people are going to want to face Shakur now because of that performance. And I disagree with that. Totally disagree with that. I think that performance makes people want to not fight you and avoid you even more. Because now they know how you can win without actually fighting. Like you can literally, you're comfortable enough to duck and dodge an entire fight as long as you land a few more jabs than your opponent. You're willing to win the fight without actually fighting. You're comfortable with that. And I think other fighters, they're not going to want to take the fight. You know what other fighters are going to say? I don't want to fight him. He's just going to run. Now, when you fought Yoshino and when you fought Valdez and, you know, all these other guys, Robson, Conceicao and stuff, no, you did good. You know what I mean? Like, you engage. But if people are going to watch this fight here and be like, I don't want to fight that guy. I can't hit him. If I can't hit him, he's just going to move and run away from me. You know what I mean? And that's exactly what's going to happen. So I don't think this fight makes him look beatable. The fight makes him look like, you know, based on boxing scoring and the way that boxing is scored and the criteria of just scoring itself, he could win the fight by not fighting at all. You know what I mean? You think Zepeda is going to want to fight him? You think... Just think Pitbull Cruz. Like, Pitbull Cruz has been ducking all kinds of smoke from everybody at the division, right? So it's not like I'm trying to defend him, but just look at him and his style. You think Pitbull Cruz watched that fight and like, I could beat this guy? No, Pitbull Cruz watched this fight like, I would never fight this guy. I wouldn't even be in ring. I wouldn't even be able to get close to him. And this guy may not even punch me. He might just slip and move continuously. You know what I mean? It was bad, you know. And I love Shakur. He's my favorite up and coming fighter, you know, or he's my favorite younger fighter. If we're talking about fighters, you know, below a certain age, Shakur is my favorite, but that was definitely his worst fight, you know. And I know he was insinuating that he had some kind of injury, that he wasn't well. You know, I mean, maybe some of it had to do with that, or maybe it's because you was in there with a fighter that could knock you out if you're not careful. Maybe it was that. Maybe it was you was with a guy that could match your speed. Okay, now overall, when I say some similarities, I'm talking about what they can do physically. You know what I mean? Like De Los Santos, very quick feet, very fast hands, sharp reflexes. Does he have the IQ of Shakur? No. Shakur is still the better talent, and he's the better defender, right? But him being as fast and powerful as he is, and I'm talking about Edwin, Shakur knew it, and Shakur did not want to engage. Just like Nakatilia at that time. Now, Shakur has improved dramatically since that fight, but now that he's improved and now he's fighting another guy that is actually dangerous, this is how he is. He doesn't like to get hit at all. You know, it's not... You know, and it's weird because Edwin, I thought Edwin's, that's one of the things I said about Edwin. Oh, man, you need to say this, man. I'm going to end it with this, man. Edwin, oh, man, I was so wrong with this, the way this fight was going to be. I thought this was a great matchup. I thought Edwin was a guy that was willing to give a punch, take a punch to give one. You know what I mean? I thought it was going to be, I thought Edwin was going to be a lot more, you know, aggressive. And I thought Shakur was going to be a lot more aggressive too. You know, there was a lot of people that was viewing the fight thought he was going to get the knockout. I thought Shakur was going to try to make a statement here. You know, I think this fight doesn't help neither one. I still think that no one's going to win. I think now Edwin is going to be a dubbed fighter. You know, because we can see what he's capable of when he is looking good. What we can also see is that this guy, you know, depending on how the fight is going, he's willing to not engage too. It's very disappointing, very confusing. Again, it's not the end of the world. You know, everybody's going to have a fight that's just not going to look that good. You know what I mean? It's going to happen. You know, it's happened with everybody. So it's not the end of the world. You know, everybody got controversial fights, whether it's because they didn't engage, whether it's because they quit, because they got knocked out, because they got embarrassed in some form or fashion. It's cool. You know, the guys that was up there with him, Andre Ward, you know, Terrence Crawford, all the guys that support him been there. You know, Floyd has been there. Floyd is, you know, they're still talking about the Castillo fight because they have no other fight to go to. They bring up the Castillo fight like it happened yesterday. Yeah, but Floyd lost to Castillo. You could be talking about any random person today. I could be talking about Lomachenko and somebody will bring up Floyd losing to Castillo. You know what I mean? People are going to bring it up. You know, it's no different from Ward and Kovalev and that whole situation. You know what I mean? It's not no different from Kai Velasquez when he fought, you know, Terrence Crawford and that questionable knockdown. Your career and your legacy is going to be remembered by those poor performances too, and this was one of them for Shakur. Again, it's not the end of the world. Depending on who he faces next, he could redeem himself. You know what I mean? It could be Navarrete, because Navarrete, he don't have to worry about not getting engaged because the guy's going to be coming straight at him. You know what I mean? But, you know, again, poor performance, but not the end of the world. It is what it is. It's more than a poor performance. It was a terrible fight. It was. It was one of the worst ones we see. You know, it's up there with Rigo and Casemiro. It's up there also with Robert Easter Jr. and Ramsey's Barthélemy, which is probably the #1 worst fight I've ever seen in my life. That was actually even worse than this one. All right, but there's no one could have predicted it based on what we've seen from both. There was no way you could predict a performance like that from the both of them. All right, they both should be held accountable for that terrible fight. But it is what it is. All right. Anyway, that is it for today's Wave Report. Please subscribe to the channel. Please smash the like button. Please leave comments and all that good stuff. I'll see you guys on the next one. Y'all have a good weekend. Peace.